9 months, 669 children, over 6,000 descendants, one man. As Hitler was gaining power, many people were threatened by his plans for a perfect race. Though many people and nations simply ignored what was happening, one man decided to take action. One man that, despite having no connections to this situation whatsoever, was compelled to take the stand that now over 6,000 people owe their lives to. Sir Nicholas Winton took a stand by organizing the escape of 669 Czechoslovakian children out of Prague, in spite of the lack of action from the government. Winton is a prime example of one individual stand making a difference. In late 1938, Adolf Hitler, Chancellor of Germany, seized a portion of Czechoslovakia bordering Germany called the Sudetenlands. The Sudetenlands were home to thousands of people who were political opponents of the Nazis. To avoid certain persecution or even death, many of these people migrated to the capital Prague, where refugee camps were set up. The camps were terrible, and there was little access to food and warm clothes. Escaping Czechoslovakia was difficult as the world closed their borders on Nazi-threatened people. The only country admitting refugees was England. In Germany and Austria, there are operations known as Kindertransports that organize the transportation of many children by sending them to England. However, there is no equivalent in Czechoslovakia. There was an organization known as the British Committee for Refugees from Czechoslovakia that granted visas, but only to adults and their families. During Christmas of 1938, Nicholas Winton, a 29-year-old English stockbroker, came to Prague on the request of his friend, Martin Blank. One of the first things Winton did in Prague was look at the camps. He was shocked by how the refugees lived and truly witnessed the horrors he was protected from in England. What stood out to him the most was the vulnerability of the children, who had no control over the situation. Winton later commented that,
"The parents desperately wanted at least to get their children to safety when they couldn't manage visas for the whole family. I began to realize what suffering there is when the armies start to march."
What Nicky Winton found was that there were people working to get adults out, but nobody was doing anything about children. And if the parents couldn't go, then the children couldn't go either. So he decided he could at least get the children out.
After Winton declared his ambitions, he was approached by many families, begging to take their children to England. Some of these families didn't live in the refugee camps, but were still at risk from the rise of the Nazis. He began creating a list of refugee children, which increased day by day.
There were lines and lines from 4 o'clock in the morning or even all overnight in his hotel. He sat there at the chair and table and wrote these lists.
Because more children were on the list than could be sent to England, Winton wrote letters to politicians from various countries and hoped they would admit refugee children. He even wrote straight to President Franklin Roosevelt. In spite of his efforts, he received the same response every time: no. Winton came back to England 3 weeks after his trip to Prague. This set the stage for the largest issue Winton would encounter: the reluctance from his own country. As Winton was hoping to send these children to England, he had to interact with the Home Office, the department of British government pertaining to immigration. The Home Office operated slowly and didn't view the rise of the Nazis as urgent. Once, when Winton was expressing his anger towards the slow manufacturing of visas from the Home Office, an employee proclaimed,
"Why rush? Nothing will happen in Europe."
In addition to its slow operation, the Home Office had many restrictions on child immigration. The Home Office placed a financial burden on Winton by requiring that a £50 bond had to be paid for the admittance of each child. This is equivalent to over $3,800 today. Winton heavily relied on the support of organizational sponsors, such as the Woodcraft Folk, to pay this fee. Another requirement Winton had to overcome was finding foster families. The Home Office required that children entering England had to live with a foster family. In order to comply, Winton sent many letters to different newspapers across the country, such as the Daily Mirror. He attached portraits of the suffering children, encouraging them to print articles about the crisis in Czechoslovakia. This is how Winton identified foster families, who were reading their respective papers. When a potential foster family notified Winton, he came to their house with placards of children, consisting of 6 to 8 portraits, along with their name, date of birth, and religion. Once the family agreed on a child, they were marked as placed on the placard and were allowed admittance into England.
I knew what was going to happen. I knew we didn't know these people. They weren't related to us. I knew, however, that I was going to have a little brother. And they had a kitten, which we didn't have, and they had a garden. We lived in an apartment. So I was looking forward to it.
Despite the many obstacles encountered, the first Czech Kindertransport left on March 14, 1939, from the Wilson station in Prague. The train traveled through Germany to get to the Netherlands. Afterwards, the children went on a ship to cross the North Sea into London. Then, they took a train to arrive at the final destination of Liverpool Street Station. Meanwhile, Nazi Germany continued to rise. On March 15, 1939, Hitler invaded the rest of Czechoslovakia.
Through the snow, the legions of occupation march into Czechoslovakia. This rapid stroke, which has outraged all freedom-loving nations of the world, is carried out with military exactitude. Infantry, too, stride confidently through the streets of the city, now reduced to the capital of a protectorate.
This created an urgent atmosphere to rescue the children immediately, inspiring an even busier summer of 1939. During this time, 4 Kindertransports were conducted, carrying a total of 508 children. Unfortunately, the inevitable occurred. On September 1, 1939, Germany invaded Poland, which sparked the beginning of World War II. All borders in Europe were then closed. That same day, the 9th Kindertransport was scheduled to leave, carrying 250 children. It was canceled, and the children were never seen again.
That bothered him a lot. His whole life, he thought about that and talked about it a little bit.
In all, 669 children were directly saved by Winton's actions. Winton's stand then went unknown for 50 years, until finally being presented to the public in 1988.
And he was a humble man who had no interest at all in promoting himself.
Winton wasn't obliged to act during those 9 months. It consumed an enormous amount of time, effort, and energy. He also had to constantly work to overcome the obstacles set by the naive English government. In spite of that, he still decided to take the stand that created an everlasting ripple effect. Sir Nicholas Winton wanted his story to be an inspiration for others to act. Though he passed away on July 1, 2015, at the age of 106, there is one huge takeaway from his life. Anyone can make a difference. Whether it be saving the lives of 669 children or volunteering at the United Nations Refugee Agency, the same is true. One stand is all it may take to create a difference in the life of another.
Ask, is there anyone in our audience tonight who owes their life to Nicholas Winton? If so, could you stand up, please?